Work Wellness Institute is transforming research into workplace performance and health. As an organization, we function throughout the complete cycle of turning research into practice, mobilizing knowledge as a research institute, community partner, funder, and educational provider. Our mission of creating safe, healthy, and inclusive workplaces for all is our driving motivation. Learning is a lifelong journey to adapt to the forever changing needs of the workplace. Whether you are a leader, a professional, an academic, or a student, we provide high-quality resources that are evidence-based, topical, and relevant to all industries. Choose the Work Wellness Institute as your learning journey partner and become a member to gain full access to our diverse knowledge mobilization programming, including lectures on demand, e-curriculum, 3 distinct certification opportunities, and more. Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we can support transforming research into performance and health for your workplace.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Highly Educated New Immigrants Workers' Perspectives of Occupational Health and Safety and Work Conditions that Challenge Work Safety. My name is Emma Bisco. I'm a Learning and Development Coordinator with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I have the privilege to live and to work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. I'd like to thank our academic team and our 9 founding partner organizations in the Harnessing Talent Project. Harnessing Talent Alliance for Recruiting and Retaining Canadians with Disabilities and Mental Health Challenges is a 3-year project funded by Employment and Social Development Canada. This webinar is made possible through the support of ESDC as well as memberships to WWI. So we thank our advisory committee and the speakers who contribute to this webinar series. And now what brings us all together today, I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Janki Shankar with us. Janki Shankar is a professor at the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary. Before joining academia, she worked for several years as a mental health therapist and rehabilitation consultant in Sydney, Australia. She has a PhD from the University of Sydney and has specialized in the vocational rehabilitation of people with disabilities. Her current research focuses on work safety and health of workers from linguistic and racialized backgrounds and those experiencing mental health issues. With that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Shankar. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted to share the research findings of our study on the perspectives of highly educated new immigrant workers on the occupation health and safety and work conditions that challenge their safety at work. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the members of our research team for their contributions and several students who have contributed to this study at various stages. I would also like to thank all our community partners from Edmonton and Calgary, without whose support this study would not have been possible. I also thank our funders, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and the Department of Labor, Alberta. The findings and implications of the study that I'm going to be presenting today is part of a larger study that has recently concluded. This large study also included an exploration of workers' post-injury experiences and a comparison of their experiences and the comparisons of the experiences of new immigrant workers and their Canadian-born counterparts in similar jobs. We also examined the perspectives of service providers and employers on the occupation health and safety needs of new immigrant workers. This presentation, however, is limited to new immigrant workers' understanding of occupation health and safety and their challenges in the workplace. I will first briefly highlight the background to this study. I will then present the study objectives and the methodology we used, followed by our findings and their implications for improving workplace health and safety for new immigrant workers. So our background: Canada, like many other developed countries in the world, depends on a continuous stream of immigrant workers to meet its labor market demands and sustain its economy. In January 2015, the Canadian government introduced the Express Entry Immigration Program to streamline the process of selecting qualified and skilled immigrants to meet the demands of the Canadian labor market, and also to clear the backlog of applications. This program, which initially allowed workers to come into Canada only with jobs, now allows qualified professionals in regulated professions and trades to enter Canada as permanent residents without the need for having secured jobs. However, since their professions and trades are regulated in Canada, many of these skilled professionals experience challenges getting their qualifications accredited by Canadian professional bodies. They therefore take up precarious employment that carries a high risk of sustaining workplace injury and illness. Precarious employment is characterized by high insecurity, hazardous work environments, high workload, low wages, and stressful psychosocial working conditions. These workers often undertake these jobs without adequate training and understanding of their occupational health and safety implications. Additionally, since many of them are not trained to work in high-risk, labor-intensive jobs, they have a higher risk of sustaining workplace injury compared to their Canadian-born counterparts. Many Canadian studies have highlighted that new immigrants have higher rates of workplace injury, but there is little information on new immigrant workers' perspectives on occupational health and safety, especially the perspectives of those who are highly qualified for the jobs that they undertake. So we also do not know much about the workplace conditions that lead to or have a potential to cause injury. So this research aimed to examine these issues. Information on their understanding of OHS can help in developing programs and interventions that can help to reduce risk of injury and the costs associated with their injury. So our study objectives. So our first study objective was, how do new immigrant workers perceive occupational health and safety? Then second objective was, what are the work conditions that pose challenges to the safety of new immigrant workers? So who are these new immigrant workers? So for the purpose of this study, and according to Statistics Canada 2011, new immigrant workers are legal immigrants, those who have legally migrated to Canada less than 10 years ago for work purposes. So the methods that we used. We adopted an interpretive research approach to explore these research questions. Now, interpretive approaches help researchers to understand the meanings that people ascribe to their experiences and how these meanings shape how they access support and how they navigate various systems. Using in-depth, semi-structured interviews lasting for about 90 minutes each, we explored the study participants' perspectives of OHS, how they acquired the knowledge of OHS, their knowledge of their rights, and the job hazards they had observed and experienced, and the physical and emotional challenges they faced in their work environments. The data were collected in Calgary and Edmonton from immigrant workers who were in Canada for less than 10 years. To participate in the study, there were some eligibility criteria. The immigrant worker should be 18 years or older, from a linguistic and or visible minority background. They must be a legal resident of Canada for less than 10 years, an immigrant who has entered Canada through a formal immigration route. Undocumented workers were excluded from the study because their issues are different, or some of their issues are different, and they would merit a study of their own. Most of these immigrant workers were referred to us by our community partners. And our data, we analyzed the data using thematic analysis. So let's go to our findings. Some basic socio-demographic information. We had 42 participants. We interviewed 42 participants, though 50 people contacted us. 24 of these had experienced and reported a workplace injury to their employers. 15 participants had not yet experienced any injury, and 3 participants had each experienced an injury but had not reported it. 23 individuals, they self-identified as males and 19 females, and age group between 18 and 55. And they originated from the following industries: construction, 33% were from, 33% were from retail, so the majority. Construction, they were 19%, and oil and gas, 14%. So these were the 3 main groups of industries that our participants came from. 79%, and this is important, 79% of the participants had bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degrees. The sample therefore included overseas qualified lawyers, tradesmen, engineers, business managers, and healthcare professionals like doctors, nurses, and social workers. Except for the social worker and the nurse and 2 tradesmen who had managed to find work in their fields, all the other participants were working as cooks, cleaners, sales or shop assistants, construction workers, warehouse workers, and machine assistants. They reported taking up these jobs as a stopgap arrangement because of the cost and the time involved in getting their qualifications recognized. The participant sample was culturally very diverse and included Africans, Chinese, Filipinos, Hispanics, South Asians, and Eastern Europeans. Again, a little bit more about our findings, the nature of their injuries. They had sustained injuries of various kinds and varying intensities that limited their capacity to work in certain jobs. And examples of these injuries include back injuries, shoulder injuries, arm injuries, repetitive strain injuries, burns from chemicals and hot liquids, and cuts. At least 10 participants had experienced workplace bullying and harassment. About their job contracts, except for those who worked in health and in the oil and gas sector, and some from the construction sector, participants had not received a written contract for their employment. They also did not possess a written description of their duties or their roles and responsibilities, and these had been verbally communicated to them by their supervisors. About union membership, only 10 participants were union members, 6 from the injured group and 4 from the non-injured group. So only 10. The remaining 32 reported that they either did not know about the existence of a union, and some of them said that they knew about the union, but they did not want to pay the union fees. So we go to their understanding of occupational health and safety. So when we ask people, what do you understand by occupational health and safety? This should include awareness of safety hazards, how to perform their job safely, their knowledge of rights and responsibilities, and their access to injury-related supports like compensation. So all the participants in our study, they reported that they were aware of the importance of working safely. When asked what they understood by OHS, their responses varied, and most participants included only some aspects of OHS. So, for example, I have 2 illustrative quotes here. OHS is knowing what to do in the event of a work-related accident. It is how to keep yourself from getting hurt or injured, anything like that. Another person says, OHS is when a company provides you with information to ensure your own safety and also your colleagues' safety in the workplace. And they provide you with information as to what you're going to wear while doing your work. So this was one of the quotes was from a non-injured worker, and one quote was from an injured worker. So there was no great difference in their understanding of occupational health and safety. Participants from we also find that there was some variation in their understanding depending on certain circumstances. So participants from the oil and gas sector and the construction sector had a better understanding of OHS. So one of them says, if OHS, that is OHS is about your life, it's about your health, and it's about your responsibility to take care of that. You have to be careful. You cannot just say, oh, let's do it. You have to be calm, relaxed, and do things carefully, slowly, and safely. You cannot rush. If you feel somebody is pushing you, and he meant supervisors and co-workers, and if you feel that this is dangerous for you, just stop. If you feel this is not safe, don't do it. And this was from an injured worker from the construction industry. These participants were generally aware of employers' responsibility to provide OHS training. They were also aware of their own responsibility to maintain safety. They were also aware of their right for compensation in the event of an injury. These respondents had undergone some specialized OHS training and had some safety certificates. They had also worked in Canada for approximately 3 to 5 years, had some experience in a similar industry overseas, and had also experienced injury. So these are some factors that increased their understanding of OHS. All the participants were also able to identify some of the job hazards in their jobs. Whereas most participants associated OHS with personal or physical safety, participants who had experienced mental distress due to racism or harassment at work took a more holistic view and included emotional as part of OHS. Safety to me, so one of these participants said, safety to me is more like mental, psychological safety, like others don't abuse me verbally, that they don't isolate me because I'm an immigrant, ignoring me, and if you speak broken English, and if you have an accent, that you don't have anything to offer. So overall, the findings suggested that participants had an incomplete understanding. So it's not that they did not have any understanding, they had an incomplete understanding of OHS. Participants' comprehension of OHS also varied depending on their years of work experience in Canada, the industry they worked in, the safety training they had received, and their experience of injury. So their perspectives on OHS training. So this includes, again, both injured and non-injured workers. So majority of the workers that had acquired knowledge about OHS in Canada from their workplaces. Some employers, especially big businesses, had provided some OHS information as part of their orientation program for new employees. Participants who did not have this training had acquired some OHS information informally from supervisors and their co-workers and through their own work experiences. Only 8 out of 42 participants expressed satisfaction with the OHS training that they had received at their workplace. Participants said that the training provided was very general. It lacked workplace, it lacked worksite and job-specific safety content, and included no information about how to perform the job safely. So these are some quotes from, this is a quote from a participant. During the orientation, they gave us a document to study and a questionnaire to fill out. So that was the basics of the safety training, general knowledge stuff. It was not a proper orientation to safety. And this is from a non-injured worker. Many workplace hazards are unique to the workplace, and a general OHS information will not provide enough information about specific workplace hazards. Several participants expressed the need for practical hands-on training that can be provided by experienced workers. So another quote, you know, my workplace is a warehouse, and it is a busy place, and there are lots of machinery, and workers constantly roam around these machines. So definitely there are so many hazards. Giving us sheets and documents for reading and signing documents is not enough. And so we need more practical training provided by a group of professional or experienced people. So this was from an injured participant. So OHS training also did not include information about accident reporting procedures and post-injury supports, including workers' compensation. So there are 2 quotes here from participants. They tell you to be careful, but they never tell you there is something like WCB, and WCB means the Workers' Compensation Board. They are very clever, and he's talking about the employers. They are very clever, but yeah, they may tell you if you ask them after the injury. They have first aid, and they will provide you when you have your hands burned or some other minor injury. Another participant said, our employers do not tell us about WCB because they have also to pay money or compensation for injured workers. Reporting an injury by a worker means financial loss for a company, and so employers try not to tell their workers about these things. This quote was from an injured worker. Participants reported that OHS training for new immigrants is provided only in English. So that was another limitation. There were no interpreters. Therefore, participants with poor English skills, they experienced difficulties understanding the training and feared that this would increase their risk of injury. Participants were also not informed that the trauma arising from bullying and harassment were OHS injuries that can be reported. At least 10 participants had experienced bullying and harassment. In spite of their dissatisfaction with the OHS training, participants did not have the courage to tell their supervisors that they needed more information and support about OHS. Neither did they ask questions of their supervisors and senior co-workers. And when we asked them the reasons for this, they said they did not want to appear disrespectful or confrontational. Maybe these are more cultural. Many also had apprehensions about how to communicate. Some reported that they were unsure of their supervisors' reactions. Some participants had also felt put off by their supervisors' irritation when they asked questions. We just go now to their awareness of rights. Participants, a good understanding of one's rights and responsibilities under the OHS legislation is critical for all workers and particularly for new immigrant workers. So this can reduce the risk of injury and also the risk of being taken advantage of by supervisors and co-workers. In Alberta, the workers' rights include the right to know about health and safety matters and hazards in the workplace and their jobs, the right to participate in decisions that could affect their health and safety, and the right to work, to refuse unsafe work. Their responsibilities include working safely, asking for training if they don't know how to do something, reporting unsafe work practices, and using a required safety equipment. All the participants in our study were informed about the right to refuse unsafe work. They were also aware that in the event of an accident, they should tell their supervisors. A few participants were also aware that they should discuss safety issues with their supervisors. But participants were not informed about employment standards like, working overtime, what's a policy about that? Taking work breaks, what's a policy about that? Although they were aware of their right to refuse unsafe work, they were, however, not able to assert this right to their supervisors or senior co-workers. Some even said that they don't even report an injury unless it is serious and visible. And the reasons for this is fear of loss of job or loss of work hours. When new immigrant workers accept unsafe work because of their disadvantaged financial situation, they allow employers to take advantage of their situation. Participants were also not informed about injury reporting procedures and the role of the Workers' Compensation Board before their injury occurred. Several participants were unaware of the possibility of returning to work on modified duties. And this information is so important for new immigrant workers who are at a higher risk of sustaining injury. So here's an example of what an injured worker said. I did not really know about WCB and the procedures for reporting injury or any workers' rights. I think it would be great to organize some talks for new immigrants so as to let them know what is workplace-related injury. I think it is most important. I think what is important is that you are knowledgeable about the procedures of reporting an injury. New immigrants usually start their life here with labor jobs, not office jobs. So they have a higher risk, higher chance of getting injured. This quote was from an engineer and from China. So there are some other workplace challenges that they experienced. One set of challenges for employers, for participants, arose from having to face OHS hazards and unsafe work conditions, either knowingly or unknowingly. Examples of hazards they faced included being exposed to toxic fumes that made them feel sick, working with faulty equipment, without personal protective equipment, because either it was not available or the personal protective equipment, basically because it was not available. The other set of challenges was from lack of support and the differential treatment some of them experienced from their supervisors and co-workers. Participants had observed that immigrant workers like them are treated less favorably by workplace supervisors than their Canadian work counterparts. Some participants reported being pressured by their supervisors or senior co-workers to take on additional duties, something that their Canadian-born peers were seldom asked to do. They stated that immigrant workers frequently took on additional duties and performed workloads equivalent to 2 or 3 people in an 8-hour shift. Sometimes participants took on additional workload just to get the approval of their supervisors. When participants tried to assert themselves and requested better working conditions, their requests were either ignored or they were asked to leave. Many highly skilled professionals, they narrated their experiences of feeling devalued and disrespected in their workplaces. Of course, it must also be mentioned that not all supervisors were perceived as unsupportive and discriminating. So finally, the summary of our findings. Highly qualified new immigrant workers are forced to take up jobs for which they have little training, especially about their OHS aspects. Their understanding of OHS is varied and incomplete. It depends on years of Canadian and overseas experience, the industry in which they have previously worked, the safety training they have experienced, and their encounters with injury. They depend on their workplaces for OHS training, but OHS training provided in workplaces is inadequate, is not culturally friendly, putting these immigrants at a higher risk for work-related injuries. Their knowledge of rights and responsibilities is also inadequate. They are aware of their right to refuse unsafe work, but rarely refuse unsafe work because of fears of termination. Although highly qualified for their jobs, these immigrants are not informed about injury reporting procedures and post-injury supports, including workers' compensation. They often learn about these only after sustaining an injury. Other workplace challenges that new immigrants experienced include racism, discrimination, and workplace harassment and bullying. So we go to the implications of our findings for policy and practice. So based on our findings, we came up with the following suggestions for reducing the risk of workplace injury for new immigrant workers. So the suggestions call for a coordinated approach and a working partnership between the government, the employers, and immigrant serving organizations. In view of the inadequate OHS training provided at workplaces, the government can implement a policy that makes OHS training a legal requirement for all new immigrants before entering the workplace or soon after. Immigrant serving organizations can be involved in providing this training and receive sustained funding from their provincial governments for this. I understand that some immigrant serving organizations are already providing some OHS training, but we know little about the content or the depth of this training. Refresher courses, just a minute. Refresher OHS training courses must be available and accessible for all new immigrant workers. The training should include, based on our findings, this training should include information on the following: what is OHS in Canada? And this also includes workers' rights and responsibilities, employment standards, information on harassment and bullying, injury reporting, and post-injury supports, including information on workers' compensation and the employer's responsibility to provide OHS training and a safe workplace environment. OHS training for immigrant employees can also include information on workplace communication norms and expectations, relationship building with supervisors and co-workers. Some other workplace interventions. Some workplace interventions. Firstly, the need for workplace interventions. Awareness of workers' rights and responsibilities and OHS is not really enough to empower new immigrant workers to refuse unsafe work. You can see that from the findings of our study. Immigrant workers must feel safe to express their concerns and learn about OHS. This calls for interventions that can help to create safe workplace environments. The promotion of safe workplace environments for immigrants can be a good business investment for employers, as it can reduce accidents and also compensation claims. Though the responsibility for promoting such environments, such workplace environments, starts with the business owners, the government has a key role to play in ensuring that employers create such environments. The government should make employers legally accountable to provide workplace and job-specific OHS information. It can do this through a system of incentives and penalties. And some governments have some of these things in place. So penalties are jail terms and fines, which are currently being used. Incentives, there should just not be only penalties, there should also be incentives. So incentives can include compulsory and regular workplace inspections by OHS officers to ensure that hazards are recognized early. Economic incentives may include tax deductions for employers who prioritize safety. Additional incentives such as bonuses can be provided to business owners who make a commitment to safety, so that keeping the workplace safe is seen as a reward rather than a burden. Another intervention is OHS training can be made mandatory for business managers and staff with supervisory responsibilities and small business owners, and importantly, new immigrant business owners, as this can increase their awareness of and commitment to implementing a safe workplace culture. OHS training for business owners and supervisory staff should include content that addresses the employers or supervisors' biases about immigrant workers' culture, their language, and their skills. The government can provide financial support to small and medium-scale employers for such training. Immigrant serving organizations and employment agencies can also be involved in providing OHS training to small and medium-scale businesses. Another workplace intervention for creating a safe workplace environment is for employers to provide mentors to their new employees. And we interviewed employers, and some employers said that they are doing this. So, but on a regular basis, employers should appoint mentors who can assist new immigrant workers with learning their jobs, provide help, their language difficulties, and learn the workplace culture. So our conclusion. So with that, I'd like to conclude. This study I'll conclude with some of our limitations of the study. The study has limitations because of the small sample size, 42. And the other thing is it is localized to 2 cities in Alberta, so we cannot generalize. Anyway, this is a qualitative study, and the findings of qualitative study cannot be generalized across large populations. Another limitation was most participants were recruited by service providers. So we do not know about the challenges faced by new immigrants who did not seek the support of these service providers. Nevertheless, our findings are significant. Immigrants bring relatively high educational qualifications to Canada. Given their educational capacity, it is often a matter of providing the necessary resources they need in a culturally sensitive manner and rendering appropriate safety monitoring and enforcement. The findings suggest that governments, employers, and immigrant service providers should work in partnership to ensure that these workers acquire OHS knowledge and are appraised of their rights before or soon after they enter the workforce. The findings suggest the need for policy and legislation that will increase employers' commitment and accountability to create safe and inclusive workplace environments for new immigrant workers. So with this, I'd like to conclude my presentation, and I'm open to questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janki. That was a really engaging presentation filled with so many different aspects that I'm sure the audience is excited about and ready to dive in with some questions. So to the audience, just a reminder, there are two ways that you can go about asking questions. So on your toolbar there, you'll see the question and answer function. You're more than welcome to submit any questions there. It does also have a feature where you can ask questions anonymously. And then there's also the chat function. So feel free to utilize either of those and submit your questions. So there was one question that came through as you were going, and it's on that topic of fear of repercussions, this environment in the workplace where new immigrants might not feel comfortable enough to, disclose an injury, or the injury has to be bad enough before they're ready to disclose or to seek out that worker compensation. So do you have any recommendations to employers specifically on how to create that environment of trust where employees feel safe to disclose their struggles, whether it be with language, lack of understanding, or dangerous work conditions?
A good question. Now, we can train or teach employees or workers as much as possible about OHS and about their rights and their responsibilities, etc. But unless there are changes in the workplace, because that's what we meant by workplace intervention. So unless, the injured employee will talk only if he or she feels safe. So unless that safe environment is also created, it's going to be very difficult for employees to actually talk about, for example, say I'm going to refuse work, because they can be fired. And this is not something that only immigrant employees told us. Even Canadian-born employees told us that they fear this. So it's not just enough to train people about these, about OHS and their rights, responsibilities, and their right to refuse work. At the same time, there should also be a workplace safety culture that should be developed. And to develop that workplace safety culture, some of the recommendations that we have made include training of business owners, supervisors, and also new business owners, also immigrant business owners, about occupational health and safety, how to create a workplace safety environment, and the culture of, also becoming more training on how to be sensitive to differences in people's culture, languages, and skills. So these are some things, these are some interventions that need to happen from the employers or the workplaces. Otherwise, it's very difficult for workers to actually express their safety concerns. I hope that answered the question.
No, absolutely. And you know what? We actually have a follow-up question looking to hear if you received any comments from employees about what would make them feel safe.
Yeah, these were some of the things that employees actually said, that I wish I could talk to my employer, so freely. I'm so scared that I will lose my job. So I wish I could talk to them more safely. I wish I could, there have been some employees who actually felt, who either because of language or because, they were scared, they had been put off, and they also had been put off by their employer's reaction to their inquiries. So they just they just shut up. And this happens more in the case of new immigrants compared to the Canadian born. So it's not that the Canadian born didn't have similar problems, but for these people, it was so much more because they had the added issues of culture, language issues, and how to express, how to communicate what they want. So these were some added difficulties. And I don't know whether I answered the question though.
I mean, I think you gave a fulsome idea of how the employees were feeling, so thank you for that. Another question here is looking at OHS policies coming from those governmental organizations, but as you spoke about, there's only so much that we can do, and a lot of the responsibility does end up falling on these employers. And that implementation is really varied. One of the ideas that I like that you spoke about was this idea of it being a reward rather than a necessary thing. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity to answer this question also of if you have any recommendations on how to ensure a more standardized and equal approach to OHS across employers or industry.
I know that this is different across different provinces. And one thing I can say from Alberta is our OHS, the way employers are held accountable and responsible for the actions is not very great in Alberta. I know that's not great in other places as well and other provinces as well, but maybe they are better. I don't know. I cannot comment on that. I know about Alberta. So your question is, what are the recommendations? Is that what you said, Emma?
Yeah. So if there's any recommendations on how to standardize this approach to OHS across employers or industry. So kind of, mediating that difference.
I don't know whether we can standardize because ultimately it depends on the provinces and what they want to do. But definitely there should be inspections, regular inspections of the workplaces so that, these faults or there are safety concerns can be identified early. There are, and I know there are some secret messages that you can actually talk, not secret. I mean, there are ways to inform the OHS department that employees can actually talk to the OHS departments about some of the safety concerns in their workplaces. But again, there are some risks with that. So that's another one. The other one is, I think I mentioned that, inspections, of course. And other thing is recognizing employers who are actually safe. So when we were speaking to some of the employers, some of them actually were practicing safety. So recognizing those employers and giving them some sort of incentive like bonuses or something that will, or some tax deductions or something like that will keep them committed and accountable to safety. So these are some recommendations across the board, across Canada that can be used, that can be, I can't say standardized, or that can be used by governments to enforce employers' accountability to safety.
That's great. Thank you, Janky. And you're getting a follow-up question on that here, where you're looking at this standardized, the organizations you're speaking of that are safe organizations. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what are some of those best practices that those organizations that you saw had, or key features that they've done?
Yeah, and I'm just trying to jog my memory because some of the best practices that some employers had were, of course, training. And when they were doing the training, they also involved some of their workers with from some of their diverse workers. So if they had a training, they would and depending on the audience, that is the people who are undergoing the training, they would involve a South Asian worker or a Chinese worker, or depending on, so that they can interpret. So they were using their own their own workers to actually interpret the training that was going on. So I thought that was a very good thing. There were some employers who also had mentors, so they would attach a person to a new worker. They attach an existing worker to a new worker, so that that was happening in some workplaces. I'm just trying to remember some of the other things that they did. And the employers did say that immigrant workers don't ask questions, and so we can't even understand whether they have understood something or not. So that is the other thing employers can do, to tell to work in groups and encourage immigrant workers to ask questions and make them feel that it's not unsafe for them. So employers can do some of these things, and some of them employers were actually doing some of these things based on their experiences with new immigrants. And of course, there were also some employers who did not want to employ new immigrants because of their beliefs that these people are dangerous as far as OHS is concerned, and we will get a lot of accident claims, etc. So these are some of the things that I remember with because of my interviews with employers.
That's great. Thank you.
It's a very good question.
Yeah. And it actually sparks a question for myself. So you speak of having interpreters, working in groups, but I'm wondering, are there any best practices for one sending out organizational policies or informing people?
Can you repeat that, Emma, please?
So looking at techniques to ensure cultural inclusivity, understanding, you spoke of translators, interpreters, as well as working in groups. Are there any other best practices to ensure understanding for all?
I can only think about the ones that we have talked about, we have discussed in this PowerPoint or in this presentation. Yeah. I mean, there were workplaces that were culturally friendly. So it's not that all workers felt that their workplaces were unfriendly. There were workers, we had workers who used the hijab. There were workers who used the turban. So there were workplaces that are culturally friendly. So it all depends on how diverse the workplace is, how sensitive the supervisors are to some of these issues. So those are things that I think employers, supervisory staff, they should be trained on some of these things. And this is very important if you want to create an inclusive and safe workplace where people can talk about their concerns. But generally, I find after having interviewed so many workers, both Canadian-born as well as immigrant workers, I find that generally in large workplaces, some of these practices are there to some extent. But in small, medium-sized, it really varies. The safety practices, and to what extent they follow policies and procedures about safety, it varies a lot. But in larger organizations, it is definitely better. And of course, they have larger organizations, have more resources. And that is why we're talking about government having policies and legislation in place to help these small and medium-sized businesses to improve to provide more resources to improve their workplace safety practices.
Right. So if you're looking at that culturally inclusive, safe environment, what about language barriers? Are there specific language barriers to ensuring worker safety? And what kind of recommendations do you have to address language barriers?
Definitely, there are language barriers and communication barriers. So language barrier is just one aspect of communication barriers, right? You may know the language, but you don't know how to convey that or communicate that in a culturally appropriate and culturally friendly manner. Sometimes when they want to communicate something, it may come out as confrontational, but it to the other person, but really that is their way of talking. So to address some of these language and communication barriers, I think it might be good to have interpreters who can be during the training, and as some employers are doing, to have workers from to have their own employees from diverse backgrounds to be included in that training.
Mm-hmm.
But I know employers are working with a lot of constraints. Taking an employee out to participate in the training can be a cost. So there are so many things that they have to work on. But it's very important that existing workers who are culturally diverse are included, or you have to get interpreters from outside, but that's an added cost, provided somebody is going to bear it. So it's okay for large employers, but for small and medium-sized, it's very difficult. So that is why I was suggesting that these small and medium-sized employers, business owners, actually undergo training in occupational health and safety, and that training can be provided by immigrant serving organizations, by employment agencies, so that they get that knowledge as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I think that we have time for one last question before I'll take it away. And this is actually kind of following up on what you're saying on having groups of inclusivity, but stemming right from the hiring practice. Do you have any recommendations of resources that employers can use to help them review their hiring practices for inclusivity?
I think that reviewing their practices on inclusivity, I don't know whether there are any practices at the moment, but in their hiring, they can include a person from a diverse background to help them hire people, new immigrants, and to also to assuage some of their fears about recruiting new immigrant workers, because new immigrant workers actually come with a lot of skills. So if they have in their hiring practice, they have included a consultant from a diverse background, that will be really helpful. And actually, I interviewed one of these people when I was interviewing employers. One of them was actually a consultant to employers. So a group of organizations had employed a consultant for hiring new immigrant workers. So I thought that was a great practice by employers.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I am looking at the clock, and it looks like we're about 2 minutes away from the top of the hour. So I'm going to take it away with some final notes. But I just want to take the time to express our gratitude to you, Janki Shankar. It's been amazing having you, and such great food for thought for our audience.
Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we're transforming research into workplace performance and health at www.workwellnessinstitute.org.